The polished leather of the deputy's holsters squeaked with each step he took up the gravel path, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the humid North Carolina morning. It was a sound of finality. Sheriff's Deputy Miller, a man Jack knew, from the local hardware store, wouldn't meet his eyes. Instead, his gaze was fixed on a crisp, tri-folded document in his hand. A document that felt like a death warrant for a piece of Jack's soul. Behind him, a second deputy stood with his hand resting casually on his service weapon, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting a distorted fisheye version of the scene. Jack, standing on the porch of his grandfather's 100-year-old house, and the perfectly manicured woman pointing an accusatory, blood-red fingernail. "We have a court order, Mr. Callahan," Miller said, his voice flat, stripped of its usual hardware store warmth. He held out the paper. "An injunction and a writ of assistance. We're here to oversee the removal of the unapproved structure." The woman, Brenda Millstone, president of the Cedar Creek Estates Homeowners Association, gave a tight, triumphant smile. Her white Lexus SUV was parked at the edge of his property, gleaming like a predator's tooth. She had orchestrated this illegal spectacle, this shocking takedown, and brought the law to enforce it. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass from her side of the invisible line, a smell that had always felt like suburban oppression, but today it smelled like war. Jack's eyes moved from the paper to the structure in question. The old workshop his grandfather had built with his own two hands, the place where the scent of cedar shavings and motor oil still lingered like a ghost. This wasn't just a fight over property. It was about to become a fight for his sanity. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. If you've ever been bullied by an HOA, you're going to love this ending. Stick with me. 6 months earlier, the only battle Jack Callahan was fighting was with a stubborn floorboard that refused to sit flush. He had inherited his grandfather's house, a 2-acre island of rustic history surrounded by a rising tide of beige modernity called Cedar Creek Estates. The property was a sanctuary, nestled under a canopy of longleaf pines and ancient oaks. The air here tasted different, clean, with a hint of damp earth and the sweet perfume of honeysuckle clinging to the old wire fence. After 10 years as a combat engineer in the Army, deploying to places that smelled of diesel, sand, and fear, this place was more than a home. It was a decompression chamber for his soul. The house itself was a testament to a bygone era. Its heart pine, floors groaned under his weight, each creak a conversation with the past. He spent his days stripping away layers of faded wallpaper, sanding down wood that had witnessed a century of life, and replacing window panes that rattled with the stories of 1,000 storms. His work was methodical, precise. He wasn't just fixing a house. He was honoring a legacy. His grandfather had taught him how to measure twice and cut once, how to read the grain of wood like a map, and how to respect the unwritten laws of the land. Laws that, Jack was about to discover, meant nothing to the new royalty next door. The first envoy from the kingdom of Cedar Creek Estates arrived not with a declaration of war, but with a welcome basket. A gleaming white Lexus crunched to a halt on the gravel shoulder of the county road bordering his property. A woman emerged, about 55, poured into a crisp linen pantsuit that seemed immune to the Carolina humidity. Her blonde hair was a marvel of engineering, a sculpted, immovable helmet. This was Brenda Millstone. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she chirped, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She held out a basket filled with artisanal crackers, a small bottle of wine, and a thick, glossy brochure. "I'm Brenda Millstone, president of the Homeowners Association." Jack wiped sawdust from his hands onto his jeans and took the basket. "Jack Callahan. Thanks for this." The cellophane crinkled under his calloused fingers. Brenda's eyes did a slow, critical scan of his property. The slightly overgrown lawn, the stack of reclaimed lumber by the workshop, the peeling paint on the porch railing he hadn't gotten to yet. "It's got a lot of potential," she said, the compliment landing like a veiled insult. "We're all just so thrilled to see someone finally taking an interest in this place. It's been quite the eyesore on the gateway to our community." Jack felt a low thrum of irritation. His grandfather's home? An eyesore? He glanced at the brochure in the basket. It was a welcome packet for the Cedar Creek Estates HOA, complete with covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Appreciate the thought, Ms. Millstone, but my property isn't actually in your development. Brenda's smile tightened. Oh, we know, but we're all neighbors, aren't we? We all want to maintain a certain standard. A rising tide lifts all boats, after all. She gestured vaguely toward his mailbox, a sturdy, handcrafted piece of weathered cypress his grandfather had made. For instance, our community covenants require all mailboxes to be the Heritage Black model from a pre-approved vendor. Just a little thing, but it creates such a harmonious aesthetic. The sheer audacity of it left him speechless for a second. She was standing on a public road, critiquing a mailbox on a property she had no jurisdiction over. This wasn't a welcome. It was a warning shot. He gave her a tight, polite smile of his own. I'll keep that in mind. He tossed the brochure onto his workbench later, the glossy photos of identical houses and perfect, sterile lawns feeling alien and cold. He was a man who understood boundaries. In his old job, a miscalculation of a few inches on a survey map could have catastrophic consequences. He pulled out his grandfather's deed and the official county plat map. The thick, aged paper felt reassuring in his hands. The boundary line was clear, marked by the old wire fence and the 3 ancient stone markers his grandfather had shown, him as a boy. His 2 acres were a sovereign nation, and Brenda Millstone was a foreign diplomat with delusions of grandeur. He thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. Where are you watching from? Comment your city. I want to see how far HOA power reaches. A week later, the first official letter arrived. It was printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock with the Cedar Creek Estates logo embossed in gold at the top. It was a formal warning regarding the non-compliant color and construction of his mailbox. It cited Article WARF, Section 2A of the HOA Covenants. Jack read it, a dark humor bubbling in his chest, and filed it away in a drawer labeled junk. He was a busy man. He was rebuilding a life, not repainting a mailbox to satisfy a petty tyrant. The silence that followed was unnerving. For 2 weeks, the only sign of Brenda was the slow crawl of her white Lexus along the county road, her head swiveling to survey his property like a predator scouting its territory. He could almost feel the heat of her stare from 100 yards away. He was on her radar now, a rogue element disrupting the perfect symmetry of her world. The smell of his chainsaw as he cleared fallen branches and the sight of his dusty pickup truck were, to her, acts of suburban terrorism. Then came the second letter. This one arrived via certified mail, forcing him to sign for it at the post office. The tone had shifted from condescendingly helpful to overtly hostile. This time, Brenda accused him of violating a different, entirely fabricated rule. Your property's inadequate water runoff, the letter stated, is causing aesthetic water pooling on HOA common grounds, creating a potential slip hazard and diminishing the visual harmony of the community entrance. It demanded he hire a licensed landscaper, offering a helpful suggestion of a company called Millstone & Sons Landscaping to regrade his property within 14 days or face a daily fine of $50. Jack's blood ran cold. This was a whole new level of illegal escalation. She wasn't just suggesting he follow her rules. She was trying to force him to spend thousands of dollars based on a complete lie. He walked the property line. The land naturally sloped away from her precious common grounds. Her accusation was a fiction, a pretext for harassment. That night, he felt the first real flicker of rage. She was attacking his home, his grandfather's legacy. His sanctuary was becoming a battlefield. He spent an hour drafting a response. He was calm, professional, and unyielding. He included a high-resolution copy of his official land survey with the boundary line highlighted in yellow. He politely reiterated that his property was not subject to her association's covenants, and that any further attempts to fine or harass him would be forwarded to his attorney. He mailed it, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. He had laid down his boundary, not just on the map, but in the sand. Checkmate, or so he thought. What would you have done in my place? Drop it in the comments. Brenda's response was not another letter. It was a personal visit. She arrived 2 days later, not alone this time. Flanking her were 2 men from her board, both looking deeply uncomfortable. They stood just on her side of the property line, a silent, 3-person tribunal. The air was heavy with the smell of pine needles baking in the sun and the faint, cloying scent of Brenda's expensive perfume. She was holding a thick, leather-bound binder, tapping it with a perfectly manicured nail. The plastic pages inside were filled with documents. A prop, a weapon of intimidation. "Mr. Callahan," she began, her voice dripping with faux pity. "Your ignorance is, frankly, becoming a liability. I'm not sure how things worked in the military, but here in civil society, we have rules." He stood on his porch, arms crossed, saying nothing. He'd learned in interrogation training that silence often makes people overplay their hand. She flipped open the binder. "Perhaps you're unaware of North Carolina's Planned Community Act. It's a fascinating piece of legislation. It states that under certain circumstances, even if you didn't sign the original covenants, a pre-existing property can be annexed into an association if it is found to be receiving material benefits from that association. And since our landscaping beautifies your view and our private security patrols make this road safer, a judge could easily be convinced that you are, in fact, benefiting." It was a knowledge bomb, and for a split second, it landed right on target. A cold spike of dread shot through him. Had he missed something so critical? Could they legally hijack his property, forcing him into her little kingdom of beige tyranny? The 2 men behind her nodded grimly, their expressions reinforcing the threat. He saw a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She thought she had him. She thought her half-baked legal threat, delivered with absolute conviction, would be enough to make him fold. The fear tasted like metallic dust in the back of his throat. This wasn't just a takedown of his property rights, it was an illegal power. "Grab!" He held her gaze. "I'll look into it," he said, his voice a low, steady calm he did not feel. "You do that," she smirked. "The fines for the water runoff start tomorrow." That night, there was no woodworking, no sanding, no quiet satisfaction of rebuilding. Instead, Jack was hunched over his laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating the tense lines on his face. The house was silent except for the frantic clicking of his keyboard and the low hum of the refrigerator. He dove into the North Carolina general statutes, his engineering mind dissecting the legal jargon piece by piece. He read the Planned Community Act forwards and backwards. The smell of brewing coffee filled the small kitchen as the hours ticked by, the moon tracing a slow arc across the sky. And then, at 2 a.m., he found it. The clause she had conveniently omitted. Annexation of an existing. Property required more than just receiving benefits, a term so vague as to be legally useless. It required either the explicit written consent of the property owner or an implied agreement demonstrated by the exclusive use of HOA-maintained amenities. Things like a private pool, a clubhouse, or most commonly, private roads. He lived on a county-maintained road. He didn't use their pool. He didn't benefit from their landscaping any more than they benefited from the beauty of his grandfather's ancient oaks. Her threat wasn't just an exaggeration. It was a deliberate, fraudulent misrepresentation of the law. A bluff. A goddamn lie. Designed to intimidate and extort. The dread that had been sitting in his gut for hours evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The shift was seismic. He was no longer a homeowner being harassed, he was a soldier, and his objective was clear. This wasn't just a defense of his property anymore. This was a counter-offensive. If you think HOAs should be held accountable, type yes, so we can get this trending. He slept for 3 hours and woke with the sun. He drafted a new letter, his fingers flying across the keyboard. This one was different. It wasn't defensive, it was dominant. He quoted the exact statute she had misrepresented, highlighting the section on owner consent. He methodically dismantled her argument piece by piece like disarming a poorly made IED. He concluded the letter with a simple, unambiguous statement. "This is your final notification. Any further communication from you or any agent of the..." Cedar Creek Estates HOA, including but not limited to letters, fines, or in-person visits, will be considered harassment. Cease and desist immediately. Govern yourself accordingly. He printed it, signed it, and drove it to her pristine little HOA community center, slipping it through the mail slot himself. The crisp thwack of the envelope hitting the floor on the other side of the door felt like the slam of a gavel. He felt a profound sense of relief on the drive home, the Carolina pines blurring past his window. He had called her bluff. He had exposed her illegal tactics. Surely even a bully as brazen as Brenda Millstone would know when to back down. He spent the rest of the day working on the porch, the rhythmic scrape of his paint scraper a calming mantra. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple, and for the first time in weeks, Jack felt a sense of peace settle over his grandfather's land. The peace was shattered at 7 a.m. the next morning. It wasn't a letter, this time. It was the guttural roar of a diesel engine, followed by the high-pitched beep, beep, beep of a vehicle in reverse. Jack shot out of bed, pulling on a pair of jeans as he ran to the window. His heart hammered against his ribs. Parked just feet from his property line was a small backhoe. A work crew of 3 men in bright yellow vests were unspooling a measuring tape. One of them held a can of spray paint. Jack flew out the front door, the cool morning air a slap to his face. The tangy chemical smell of the spray paint hit him first. He saw it instantly. A stark, fluorescent orange line, marking a path 10 feet inside his property line, running straight through a row of delicate dogwood trees his grandmother had planted 50 years ago. The orange paint looked like a fresh, wound against the deep green of the grass. "What the hell is going on?" Jack yelled, his voice rough with sleep and fury. The foreman, a burly man with a sun-scorched neck, turned, looking annoyed. "Morning. We've got a work order to clear. This line, putting in a new drainage culvert for the HOA. You're on my property," Jack said, his voice dangerously low. He pointed to the nearly invisible wire fence just beyond the orange line. "That is the property line. You are 10 feet inside it." The foreman shrugged, unmoved. He pulled a folded grease-stained paper from his back pocket and handed it to Jack. "Not according to this. We've got a signed order here citing an emergency utility easement. Says we've got the right to clear a 15-foot path." Jack's eyes scanned the document. It was a fraudulent-looking work order, filled with boilerplate language. But at the bottom was a signature, a flowery, arrogant scrawl he now knew all too well. Brenda Millstone, President, CCE HOA. She hadn't just ignored his warning. She hadn't just trespassed. She had fabricated a legal document and dispatched a crew to physically destroy his property. This was no longer harassment. This was an invasion. The illegal entry was happening right now, and the first casualties were about to be his grandmother's trees. The war had just gone hot. Jack's voice cut through the morning air, sharp and steady as a chalk line. "Stop!" It wasn't a yell, but an order. The foreman, halfway to the backhoe's controls, froze. The 2 other workers who had been readying their chainsaws looked up, their expressions shifting from casual indifference to wary attention. They saw something in Jack's eyes they hadn't expected. It wasn't the frantic anger of a cornered homeowner. It was the focused calm of a man who understood the geometry of a collapse. "That document is fraudulent," Jack stated, holding up the work order. "There is no emergency easement on this property. The moment your blade touches those trees, or that bucket breaks this ground, you move from civil trespass to felony criminal damage to property. And I will not only sue your company into the ground, I will press charges against each of you, individually." The air was still, the only sound the chirping of a nearby cardinal, a starkly peaceful soundtrack to the unfolding confrontation. The rich, loamy smell of the earth, moments away from being torn asunder, seemed to hang in judgment. He took a deliberate step forward, stopping just inches from the bright orange line. "I am putting you on official notice. You are being used to perpetrate a crime. Your employer will not protect you from that. Leave my property now." The foreman looked from Jack's unblinking stare to the flimsy work order in his hand, then back to Jack. He was a contractor, not a soldier in Brenda Millstone's private army. He saw no profit in a legal battle with a man who spoke about felonies with such unnerving certainty. He spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the grass, carefully, avoiding the orange line. "All right, boys, pack it up. This ain't worth the headache." The crew grumbled, but they obeyed. The diesel engine rumbled to life one last time, a growl of retreat, and the backhoe trundled back onto the county road. Jack stood there until the sound faded, his heart still a trip hammer in his chest. He had won the battle, but the orange line remained on his grass, a garish, ugly declaration that the war was far from over. What they did next almost made me lose everything, but it also gave me the win of my life. The retaliation was swift and insidious. Brenda, denied her brute force victory, pivoted to psychological warfare. The next afternoon, a post appeared on the private Cedar Creek Estates community Facebook page. Jack only found out because a sympathetic neighbor, an older woman who had once brought him a pie and quietly complained about Brenda's reign, sent him a screenshot. The post was a masterpiece of suburban slander. Brenda wrote of a deeply concerning incident with the new resident of the old property. She painted Jack as an unstable, aggressive veteran, using carefully chosen words like erratic, confrontational, and threatening. She claimed he had screamed obscenities and lunged at the poor, innocent work crew who were only there to perform vital community maintenance. She ended the post with a flourish of feigned concern. "We pray for his peace of mind, but for the safety of our children and our community, we must remain vigilant." The comments section was a cesspool of pearl-clutching and fear-mongering. "I knew he was trouble," one wrote. "My kids play near there," wrote another. In the space of an afternoon, she had branded him a pariah. He could feel the eyes on him now when he drove past the development entrance. The friendly waves from neighbors stopped. The air of suspicion was as palpable as the scent of gardenia from their perfectly manicured flower beds. She wasn't just trying to take his land. She was trying to poison his existence, to isolate him on his own island. The relentless, grinding pressure began. It was a war of 1,000 paper cuts. On Monday, a certified letter arrived with a $100 fine for unsecured construction materials, referring to the stack of reclaimed lumber he used for his restoration work. On Tuesday, a notice of violation for excessive noise was taped to his front door, citing the sound of his circular saw, used at 2 p.m. on a weekday. On Wednesday, an animal control truck showed up, responding to an anonymous complaint about a vicious, barking dog. Jack didn't own a dog. The officer left, embarrassed and apologetic, but the message was clear. Brenda could summon the arms of the state to harass him at will. Jack knew he couldn't weather this storm alone. His tactical training kicked in. This was an intelligence gathering operation. His enemy had a fortress, the HOA, and he needed to find the blueprints. That led him to the county records office, a squat brick building downtown that smelled of dusty paper, weak coffee, and decades of slow-moving bureaucracy. Behind a tall counter sat a woman in her late 60s with a formidable beehive of gray hair and glasses perched on the end of her nose. Her nameplate read, Martha. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting it was highly unlikely. "I hope so," Jack said, laying his grandfather's deed on the counter. "I need to see the original master deed and plat maps for the development known as Cedar Creek Estates." Martha eyed him over her glasses, a flicker of interest in her eyes. "Having HOA trouble?" she asked, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "You could say that." A wry smile touched her lips. "Brenda Millstone's kingdom, huh? You're not the first poor soul to come digging through these books because of her. She runs that place like it's her own personal North Korea." The unexpected alliance felt like a ray of sunshine. Martha became his guide, his quartermaster, in this fight. She showed him how to operate the clunky microfiche machine and navigate the massive, leather-bound plat books whose pages crackled like autumn leaves. He spent days hunched over those records. The musty smell of the archives filled his lungs. He traced property lines with his finger until they were smudged with graphite and ink. He was looking for a crack in Brenda's armor, a mistake, a single loose thread he could pull. Ever dealt with an HOA bully? Let's see how many of us there are. And then, on the third day, he found it. It was buried deep within the fine print, of the original master deed filed by the developer a decade ago. It was a single paragraph titled Parcel Exclusion. His heart began to beat faster. The language was dense, archaic legalese, but its meaning was explosive. The developer had explicitly and permanently carved out his grandfather's 2-acre parcel, identified by its 19th century metes and bounds description. It was designated as a non-subject, non-beneficiary property. But the next sentence was the kill shot. Furthermore, it read, no easement, covenant, or restriction, express or implied, originating from within the Cedar Creek Estates development shall encumber, cloud, or attach to the excluded parcel without a separate, publicly recorded instrument of conveyance signed and notarized by the legal owner of said parcel. This was the knowledge bomb he'd been searching for, the silver bullet. The whole foundation of Brenda's authority was a lie. Her emergency easement wasn't just fraudulent, it was a direct violation of the foundational legal document of her entire HOA. She didn't just have no power over him. The developer had legally built a fortress around his property to ensure it. He felt a surge of adrenaline, the taste of victory already on his tongue. The next 60 seconds will show you exactly how a single document can destroy an entire HOA armed. With his discovery, Jack sought professional backup. He found a local property lawyer, a man named Dave Rosner, who listened to the story with growing outrage. When Jack showed him the exclusion clause, Rosner's eyes lit up. My God, he said, the sound of him tapping a pen on his legal pad, the only noise in the quiet office. This is an ironclad case. She's not just harassing you, she's committing fraud and likely violating the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act with those fines. We'll draft a cease and desist letter that will make her hair curl. For the first time in months, Jack felt the crushing weight on his shoulders begin to lift. He was finally on the offensive. He had the law, the facts, and a lawyer ready to fight. It felt like a turning point, the moment the tide of the war shifted in his favor. The feeling lasted for exactly 48 hours. Rosner called him, his voice strained and apologetic. Jack, I'm sorry. I have to withdraw from your case. What? Why? Jack demanded, the cold dread returning with a vengeance. You said it was a slam dunk. It is, Rosner sighed. The sound of shuffling papers came through the phone. But there's a complication. A conflict of interest has been brought to my attention. Brenda Millstone's husband, Richard Millstone, he's a senior partner at Cromwell and Finch. They handle the legal work for half the developers in the county. He also happens to sit on the town's Zoning and Planning Commission. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This was Brenda's power lever. Her leverage wasn't just the HOA, it was her husband's deep, suffocating influence over the entire local legal and political landscape. Rosner, a small-town lawyer, couldn't risk making an enemy of a man like that. It was professional suicide. Jack was radioactive. He had been legally and politically outmaneuvered. The system wasn't just broken, it was captured. The fake resolution he had imagined, the glorious victory in court, collapsed into dust. He was back to square one, but worse. Now he was isolated, unable to even hire representation. The fines and violation notices continued to arrive, a daily reminder of his powerlessness. It was during this low point that Jack started watching Brenda. Not just as an adversary, but as a subject. He'd sit on his porch in the early evenings, the air cooling and smelling of night-blooming jasmine, and observe her house. Her lawn was a perfect green carpet. Her flowers were arranged in militant, rows of color. And then he saw it. Her obsession. A single magnificent rose bush near her front door, bearing deep, velvety red blooms. She tended to it with a reverence that bordered on worship, snipping and pruning with delicate, surgical precision. It was the only thing in her rigidly controlled world that seemed to receive genuine affection. One Saturday afternoon, he witnessed something else. Richard Millstone, her husband, pulled into their driveway in a black Mercedes. He got out, a large, imposing man in a golf shirt, and began yelling at Brenda about the placement of a sprinkler. His voice was a low, cutting growl, but the venom was unmistakable. Jack watched as Brenda, the unshakable tyrant of Cedar Creek Estates, visibly flinched. For a fleeting second, her mask of imperious control shattered, revealing a woman who was humiliated and afraid. Then, just as quickly, the mask was back. She nodded meekly, turned off the sprinkler, and went inside. In that moment, Jack understood. Her fanatical control over the HOA wasn't about power. It was about the lack of it in her own home. The neighborhood was the one place where she could be the one who yelled, the one who intimidated, the one who held all the cards. Her petty tyranny was a desperate compensation for her own powerlessness. She wasn't a queen in her castle. She was a prisoner who had decorated her cell and was now demanding everyone else follow her decorating rules. This new insight didn't make him forgive her, but it changed his strategy. He wasn't just fighting an evil HOA president anymore. He was fighting a deeply insecure woman whose only source of validation was a set of rules she could wield like a weapon. And she had just shown him her greatest vulnerability, her desperate need for the appearance of legitimacy. That evening, stewing in a potent cocktail of rage and helplessness, he spread all her violation notices and letters across his grandfather's old oak table. The sheer volume of paper was staggering. He felt the rough texture of the cardstock, smelled the sterile, inky scent of her threats. He was about to sweep them all into the trash when his eye caught something on the copy of the work order the foreman had given him. It was a stamp from the county permits office with a signature scrawled over it, supposedly from the chief inspector, a man named Gus Franklin. Jack had met Gus once, a gruff but fair man who had to sign off on some of Jack's electrical work. He remembered Gus's signature. It was a messy, almost indecipherable scrawl. The signature on this permit was different. It was neat, too neat. A perfect, clean loop on the G, a sharp, decisive cross on the F. It looked less like a real signature and more like a high schooler's careful forgery. A new plan began to form in his mind, a high-risk, asymmetric maneuver. He couldn't beat her in a legal system her husband controlled. He couldn't fight her with lawyers he couldn't hire, so he would have to change the battlefield entirely. He would take the fight public. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the number for the biggest TV news station in the state capital. He thought about the risk, the exposure, but then he thought about the orange line on his lawn, the smug look on Brenda's face, and the memory of his grandmother planting those dogwood trees. The choice was clear. He pressed the call button. A crisp, professional voice answered. Channel 8 News, how can I help you? Jack took a deep breath, the air in the quiet house electric with a new and dangerous possibility. My name is Jack Callahan, he said, his voice steady and clear. I have a story for your investigative unit. It's about HOA corruption, systemic harassment, and what I believe is the forgery of public documents by a powerful local figure, and I have the proof. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Sarah Jenkins, a senior investigative reporter for Channel 8. She was exactly what Jack hoped for, professional, sharp, and with a voice that carried a healthy dose of journalistic skepticism. She agreed to meet him at a small, out-of-the-way diner 20 miles from Cedar Creek, a place that smelled of old vinyl, frying bacon, and secrets. Jack arrived with a thin accordion file. He had organized the contents, with the same precision he would have used to map a minefield. He laid it all out on the sticky tabletop. The cascade of threatening letters, the screenshot of Brenda's slanderous Facebook post, the certified mail receipts, and the high-resolution copy of the Master Deeds Exclusion Clause. He walked her through the story, his voice low and factual, letting the documents speak for themselves. Sarah listened intently, her pen scratching furiously in a notepad. But it was the final exhibit that made her stop writing. He slid the forged work order and a legitimate document bearing Gus Franklin's real signature across the table. This is the kill shot, Jack said. Her harassment was a civil matter. This is a felony. Sarah held the papers up to the light, her reporter's instincts buzzing. The difference in the signatures, once pointed out, was glaring. "If this is what you say it is, Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice now charged with a new energy, "this isn't just a story about a rogue HOA. This is a story about public corruption." The Channel 8 investigation was a quiet, methodical blitzkrieg. Sarah Jenkins was a force of nature. She got an off-the-record confirmation from the terrified foreman of the work crew, who admitted he'd had doubts about the work order from the start. She secured an on-camera interview with a visibly furious Gus Franklin, the county inspector, who looked into the camera and stated unequivocally, "That is a forgery. I am filing a formal complaint with the district attorney's office." The final piece was the confrontation. Sarah and her cameraman ambushed Brenda in the parking lot of a grocery store. The camera rolled as Sarah calmly asked, "Mrs. Millstone, can you comment on allegations that you forged a county permit to destroy private property?" Brenda, caught off guard, reacted with pure, undiluted arrogance. "That is a ridiculous and defamatory accusation," she snapped, shielding her face with a hand. "My attorneys will be in contact with your station. You have no idea who you're dealing with." She sped off in her white Lexus, but the damage was done. Her flustered, angry denial was more damning than any confession. The trap was now baited. All Jack needed was the right place to spring it. The opportunity arrived in his, or rather his neighbor's, mailbox. It was a flyer announcing the Cedar Creek Estate's annual budget meeting, a mandatory event for all homeowners. Tucked at the bottom of the agenda was a 30-minute open forum for resident concerns. This was it. Not a courtroom her husband could influence, but her own throne room. He would confront the queen in front of her own court. Jack sent a polite registered letter to the HOA board, formally requesting 5 minutes of the open forum time. He cited his position as an adjacent property owner with information that, directly, pertains to the association's legal and financial liability. He knew Brenda would see the request. He also knew her fatal flaw was her hubris. The chance to publicly humiliate the unstable veteran who had dared to defy her would be too tempting to resist. His request was approved. The night of the meeting, the community center buzzed with the low murmur of suburban politics. The air was a stale mix of cheap coffee, floor polish, and a dozen different perfumes. Jack slipped into a seat in the back row, his presence creating a ripple of whispers. He ignored them. He was a combat engineer in enemy territory, observing, waiting for the optimal moment to act. Brenda stood at a podium at the front of the room, radiant in a royal blue power suit. She was in her element, basking in the authority of her position. She opened the meeting with a saccharine speech about community, harmony, and the unfortunate necessity of protecting our shared property values from negative influences. Her eyes flickered towards Jack for a fraction of a second. The message was clear. When the open forum began, Jack's name was called. A hush fell over the room as he walked to the front. He carried nothing but a small USB drive. He plugged it into the laptop connected to the projector, and the first image flashed onto the screen behind Brenda. A high-resolution scan of the master deed's parcel exclusion clause. "Good evening," Jack began, his voice calm and amplified by the microphone. "For those who don't know me, my name is Jack Callahan. I own the 2-acre property your community was built around." He gestured to the screen. "This is from your association's founding document. It legally designates my property as a non-subject, non-beneficiary property. In simple terms, it means your HOA has absolutely no jurisdiction, no authority, and no power over my land. It never has." A low murmur spread through the room. Brenda's face tightened, her smile becoming a thin, hard line. Jack clicked to the next slide. It was the flurry of violation notices, displayed one after another. "Despite this clear legal boundary, your president, Mrs. Millstone, has spent the last 6 months engaged in a campaign of illegal harassment and extortion against me." He then showed the screenshot of her Facebook post, her words now glowing, with slanderous light on the big screen. The murmurs grew louder. People were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They were seeing the receipts. "She tried to extort me for thousands of dollars in fake drainage work," Jack continued, his voice even and relentless. "She slandered my name in your community forum. And when none of that worked, she decided to physically destroy my property. He clicked again. The image of the fraudulent work order appeared on the screen, next to a scanned copy of Gus Franklin's driver's license showing his real signature. She hired a work crew using this document, a forged county permit bearing a forged signature of your county inspector. The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the projector fan. Brenda, who had been standing stiffly behind him, took a step toward the microphone. This is an outrage. These are lies. This is doctored evidence. Jack ignored her. He held up his phone and pressed play. The clear, angry voice of Gus Franklin filled the room from a recording. That is not my signature. That document is a fake. I never authorized that work. A collective gasp went through the audience. Brenda's face went white. Jack turned to face the homeowners, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its intensity. This was the moment for the final, devastating knowledge bomb. I'm not a lawyer, he said, but I've had to learn a few things. What you're seeing isn't just a violation of HOA rules. Under North Carolina General Statute 14120, this is a Class 1 felony, forgery of a public instrument. It's punishable by prison time. He paused, letting the words sink in. And here's the most important part for all of you, because Mrs. Millstone used HOA funds to hire that crew based on this felony forgery. She didn't just expose herself. She exposed this entire association, every single one of you, to catastrophic civil liability. The legal concept is called vicarious liability. Her actions were your actions. Her crimes, committed in her official capacity, are your financial responsibility. Panic began to erupt. People were turning to each other, their faces a mixture of confusion and horror. A man in the front row stood up. Is this true, Brenda? Did you do this? And that's when Brenda finally shattered. Her carefully constructed facade of serene authority crumbled into dust, revealing the snarling, cornered creature beneath. He's lying, she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. He's a nobody. He threatened workers. He's trying to destroy our beautiful community. You have to believe me. Her meltdown was a spectacle of pure desperation. Her authority, built on a foundation of lies and intimidation, was evaporating before her very eyes, and at that precise moment, the double doors at the back of the community center swung open. Sarah Jenkins entered, followed by her cameraman. The bright, unforgiving light of the news camera flared to life, illuminating the entire scene. The shocked faces of the residents, Jack standing calm and resolute at the podium, and Brenda, frozen mid-rant, her face a grotesque mask of rage and terror. The trap had not just been sprung, it had been televised. Her shocked face, forever captured on film, was the perfect thumbnail for her own spectacular takedown. The aftermath was a swift and total collapse of Brenda's kingdom. The Channel 8 story aired that night and went viral online. The district attorney's office, under the glare of the media spotlight, launched a formal criminal investigation into forgery and fraud. Richard Millstone's law firm, facing a public relations nightmare, quietly suspended him from the Zoning and Planning Commission. Facing criminal charges and complete social ruin, Brenda Millstone resigned in disgrace. The remaining board members, terrified of the liability Jack had exposed, held an emergency session. They voted unanimously to rescind all fines, formally dissolve any and all claims against his property, and issue a public letter of apology. New HOA board was elected, led by the kind, pie-baking neighbor who had first warned Jack. The reign of terror was over. The beige-colored fear that had permeated Cedar Creek Estates was replaced by something Jack hadn't thought possible: a genuine sense of community. Months later, on a cool spring morning, Jack stood on his property. The scent of damp earth and new life hung in the air. The ugly orange line that had once scarred his lawn was long gone, reclaimed by the green grass. In its place was a row of young, healthy dogwood saplings, their delicate branches reaching for the sun. He had planted them himself, in the exact spot where his grandmother's trees had stood, a quiet monument to his victory. His grandfather's workshop, the unapproved structure that started it all, stood proud and untouched. He picked up the last project he'd been working on, a simple, sturdy mailbox, built from a single piece of heart pine reclaimed from the house. He had carefully painted it a deep, rich heritage black. He walked to the edge of his property and mounted it on the post. It wasn't a surrender. It wasn't an act of compliance. It was a choice, freely made. A symbol of peace extended to neighbors, not a tribute paid to a tyrant. It was the final, quiet act of a war he had never wanted, but had been built to win. He had defended his sanctuary, honored his legacy, and in the process, liberated an entire community. This wasn't just a victory for him. It was a victory for anyone who has ever been told they have to follow rules that don't apply, for anyone who has been bullied by those who hide their weakness behind a thin veneer of power. If you believe no one is above the law, hit subscribe so we can take down every corrupt HOA together. Your story could be next. Comment your HOA horror below and I might cover it. Because sometimes, the only way to protect your peace is to go to war.